I'm Maryam Massah, and you're listening to the Tools of the Trade podcast.
Welcome, please welcome
to another episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast, your number one construction industry resource. Hear conversations with industry professionals to get the tools, stories, and advice that you need to set your career on fire. You're now streaming the Tools of the Trade podcast.
What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Tools of the Trade. I'm your host, Colin Toop, and as always, I aim to bring you the stories you want and the actionable tools you need from construction professionals to absolutely crush it out there in your construction careers. Did you know that most new podcasts don't survive past their 10th episode? That was something that was in the back of my mind when I started this podcast, which is why I recorded 10 before I even launched. And well, today is a small milestone for me here at Tools of the Trade. When I launched on Halloween of last year, I didn't quite know what to expect. And now there's really no signs of slowing down. It's picked up a lot of traction. And I couldn't have done that without you guys, everybody listening, and everybody that's come on to collaborate on this podcast and share their stories and all the great guests that I've been able to speak to up to this point. So today marks episode number 20. That is twice the statistical average failure rate, which I'm very proud of. So seriously, thank you all. It's a huge collaborative effort, and I'm humbled by all the positive feedback that I've received from everybody on all social media platforms, as well as through the comments and the reviews that you guys have been leaving in your podcast apps. Thank you so much. Today also marks the last episode of Project Management Month, which was my second iteration of a month-long experiment where I grouped together specific disciplines in an attempt to give you alternating perspectives and views from their worlds in their different fields of work. But to keep things fresh and exciting, I will be mixing episodes up again starting in April to provide you with a broader spectrum of people throughout the month so that you don't get stuck listening to the same type of discipline. Even though everybody's exciting, I'm going to go back to mixing it up. So I hope that you enjoy it, and stay tuned as there's going to be quite a few new segments being released as well, along with the standard long form podcast. So look out for that. And of course, I will update everybody as that does come out and closer towards the end of April. Today's guest is Maryam Massah. Who is Maryam Massah? Well, she is the Senior Project Manager of Design, Development, and Facilities at Cactus Club Café, and formerly a Project Manager at Shape Properties. Maryam is an absolute management powerhouse and a wealth of information that she was more than happy to share with me during our conversation. I wanted to get some serious takeaway value from her, and she did not disappoint with negotiation tactics, how to hold effective and efficient meetings, tips for removing the us versus them mentality between contractors and consultants, and some really good advice for anybody starting out in the project management world. This podcast and all project management episodes can be found at toolspodcast.com/project management month. And as always, if you want to help me build the construction community, please pause this episode, head back into your podcast app, and leave me a review and a rating. It really helps this podcast rank across all platforms and get noticed by others, and allows me to continue with my mission of giving back to our industry. And now a quick word from our presenting partner, Noor Hashim of Build a Dream.
Hey guys, this is Noor Hashim, president and founder of Build a Dream. At Build a Dream, we believe there is value in highlighting all role models. Profiling females in industry demonstrates that these are attainable goals and allows other young women to imagine themselves in similar careers. Sharing insight, barriers, and success is vital to influencing the future workforce. Build a Dream is absolutely honored to present today's Women in Industry on Tools of the Trade. For more information, please visit our website at www.webuildadream.com. Let's get right into the episode.
Maryam, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And this is Project Management Month. You're the second female project manager to come on, and I think that you have a really interesting story, and you've worked for some very interesting companies. And I'm really trying to provide the listeners with not only your career story, but some tools that they can implement right away based on your expertise in the field, because you've seen quite a lot of stuff. And as I like to do with most of these episodes, what is your role, your position, your title, and your day-to-day look like right now?
Well, my position right now is with Cactus Club, and I'm basically the senior manager for the construction side. My department is design, development, and facilities. I'm oversee projects, every construction project that we are doing. I work with our design and development on new and upcoming trends to incorporate into our builds. I also look over leases and make sure the information that we get from the landlord is correct, and that the space that we're looking at is a feasible space for what we needed. Because having building restaurants, you can't just go into any space. There's a lot of heavy mechanical, electrical that is involved. And then I also just mentor. We have a few PMs that are working for us in the East Coast as well as locally, that I kind of mentor and help ingrain in them the stuff that I've learned over the years.
Cool. And just for anybody that may not know, Cactus Club originated in Vancouver, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually at their location here at Canada. I can't remember what the street is called, but
Oh,
it's like
First Canada Place.
First Canada Place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their flagship. It's really cool. You take it. There's an elevator inside. It's got 3 stories, patio on the roof.
Yeah.
So
No, it's a happening place for sure.
yeah, if anybody's not familiar with Cactus Club, it's probably because they're not everywhere yet. But it seems like you guys are making your way across Canada, which is super cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the plan.
There you go. So, I mean, that's a really interesting scope that you kind of manage at Cactus. Now, where I'd like to go next is your educational journey. So, I've talked to quite a lot of people now on this podcast, and some people take the traditional path of going, they know right away, like, oh, I'm going to be a PM, and then they go to school for project management, or I'm going to be an engineer, or I said, screw it, I'm not going to school at all. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. So there's such a diverse group of people, and their educational background is all different. So how did you get into project management from the educational side? Like, what happened after high school for you?
That's an interesting question. And so I took the route of that's not what I actually wanted to do. I went to university, I went to UBC, I went to Douglas College first and then UBC for psychology. I wanted to be an occupational therapist. That was kind of my area of expertise. And so I studied that for years. And I was working at the same time as going to university. I was working at Future Shop at the store level. So the reason I made the change is my friends were graduating with these doctorates and these masters, and just getting a job was impossible in the field that they were in. So I decided that I'm going to, when I was working at head office for Future Shop, at that later on in the education portion, and in the operation department, and the construction team seemed to be a really solid team. They always had fun, and there was obviously money. That's where the most money was. So I switched over. I took a position internally as a project coordinator with Future Shop, and they put me through my schooling at BCIT, and through building technology and learning how to read drawings and contract management is kind of how I got to where I've gotten.
Very cool. And then, so after you had that stint at Future Shop, what was the next step for you?
So I was at Future for quite a few years. So after that, I actually got headhunted by general contracting company, Omicron, which is a design build firm. And
Yep.
so I went over there to be a project manager in their interior offices and retail side. And so I did that for quite a few years, working with interior designers and specifically every office tower in the downtown core. At one point or another, I have had my work done in. So I've managed a lot of the buildings, a lot of AAA buildings. And I would say from that experience, I learned how to work with very high maintenance people. Working in an office, like when you have tenants below, tenants above, and the hours of operation, you got to be very careful and you have to be very organized. So that would be the takeaway from that experience.
I can definitely attest to that as well. I remember one time we had a job in Vancouver and we were doing a restaurant, and there was tenants above. Funny enough, guess who the tenant above was? It was Cactus.
Oh, no
And
way.
we had specific working hours where we could do shutdowns. And one of my guys is in the he's in the main electrical room in the parkade, and he accidentally tripped the main breaker and shut the building down. And I'm driving in, right, to check on the guys, and I'm coming down into the parkade, and I'm like, there's no lights on down here. I just see the emergency lights on. What the hell is going on? Because we were inspecting the main switch gear, and he had accidentally tripped the breaker off somehow. And of course, the first people to call us was Cactus, and they were
Of
like, "What's
course.
going on? We're going to lose all our infrastructure and information. You guys got to restore power." And luckily, nothing happened. But yeah, definitely some high maintenance people and so many rules and regulations when you've got other people
Yep.
within the building. So that's definitely a crazy learning experience, and definitely you've probably learned to manage people quite well. So after Omicron, you went to Shape, right?
Yeah, correct. So again, when I was at Omicron, I got headhunted to go to Shape. And at that time, they were doing one of their bigger redevelopments, which is High Street in Abbotsford. It's a multi level retail mall, which has a parkade below with a Walmart. And then above it is a podium with more retail. But that's all tied together through one fire alarm system. So it's a very complicated build out. So I got brought on as a tenant coordination manager, basically project managing all of our tenants going into that particular location, straight from the base building side all the way to post tenant improvements. And so, yeah, I did that for a number of years. And then right after that project was done, which was, I believe, I want to say 2012, 2013,
Hmm.
I got asked to take a project manager role on again, as opposed to being a tenant acquisition manager for our development in Calgary, Deerfoot City. And I spent 4 years just going back and forth between Vancouver and Calgary basically every week. And that development was another large 1980s style mall that they basically refinished all the exterior and put a road through the mall while keeping and maintaining operating tenants, and
Wow.
built a few pad buildings. So I worked on that project as a base building project manager. So I was there from the city side through the tendering, through hiring the contractor, to working with the architectural firm and the consulting teams to help design and build that project.
So would you then be considered on the client side or on the contractor side of things in that role?
Owner side, because I was
Owner side.
representing the developer. So we hired Ledcor, who would have been our contractor.
I see. Okay. So you have good experience on the client side, which is great because I just had another guest on that is also working on the client side for Ontario Power Generation, and he's been able to see both sides of the fence, which I think is kind of a great opportunity for people to learn to speak each other's language when it comes to building.
100%. I would say my Omicron side from acting as a general contractor, because Omicron is a general contractor, made a lot of the changes and impacts that I got to utilize at Shape, representing the owner and making sure that all sides were heard properly.
Cool. And when you were at your first job with Shape there, and you were saying that you were managing sort of the tenant fit out process, so would that be anybody that's looking to move into the mall and lease space for their store?
Yeah, so we were 60%. A lot of times with these developments, they get pre-leased to ensure that we're not going to have any kind of vacancies or issues filling out the mall.
Hmm.
So it's working with their project management teams in their drawing submissions, their city process, coming to site, inspecting the site to make sure that the landlord, who is what I was representing, had met their obligations per the lease, and that the tenant, when their contractor came on board, wouldn't have any complications building their space out.
Right. So I had a question for you about that specifically because I've done some tenant improvement in the mall, and I was curious if it's true that they shuffle businesses around in the mall based on position within the mall to get exposure for the larger companies that essentially pay more for a lease space, if that makes sense.
It all depends on how the smaller tenants or their leases were designed. Like a lot of times, a developer will put relocation clauses in to the lease, stating that if time comes and there's a redevelopment or it makes sense for the mall to relocate that particular tenant, then they have the right to issue it a proper notice, which is typically like 30 days. They do it in advance of 30 days, but I think the minimum is 30 days. And sometimes a tenant, if they have a good leasing agent, writes in there that it's at the landlord's cost. So yeah, they get relocated to suit with the future plans of that mall. But sometimes, depending on how the lease is negotiated, it does come at a cost to the developer or the landlord.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. I've always wondered. So that's interesting that it's negotiated like that. Cool.
Mhm.
Now, when you were on your Calgary project, I mean that's a large project, and you're dealing with so many different things. What does a typical day look like for a project manager on a job like that? Like, when are you on site, when you leave, and what happens in between?
Yeah, so for that particular project, I was on site on a weekly basis. So I would fly in Calgary on like a Wednesday and stay overnight and return back on a Thursday weekly. And I did that again for 4 plus years. And my typical day to day for a PM on that job was coming in and putting out fires. A lot of times it would be, they're an hour ahead. So I would be getting emails an hour ahead and it'd be issues or, drawings that weren't coordinated, a lot of RFIs and questions on expectation on finishes from the landlord side and also information required from the tenant because, for example, the lease says, this CRU, the 3-inch water line needs to be supplied and installed by the landlord per tenant design. Right. So I would have to like make sure we were ahead of the game and we're not delaying the base building by having that information from the tenant and coordinating it through our mechanical consultant and issuing it to site. So there was a lot of coordination. I would say like sometimes I'd work from home depending on the situation. Matt, my husband, used to basically tell me, he's like, you don't leave your desk or your spot where you're in front of your laptop because it's email after email after email, phone calls, meetings, emails. So it is definitely a kind of job that will keep you busy.
It keeps you engaged, right? Are you able to transition and compartmentalize the work and switch it off? Or are you the type of person I have a feeling that you're always involved?
Yeah, so like that would be, I mean, one of Matt's biggest things that he talks about is that I actually don't know how to turn it off. I think when you're a project manager, it's in your blood. I think it's something that comes naturally. So you do bring that level of, organization or kind of attitude into your relationship. What I have learned on my end is to tone it back a little bit because work Miriam can be a little bit more assertive. And so home
Yeah.
Miriam needs to be a little bit more compromising.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah, you're constantly fighting the good fight at work and putting fires out and, fighting for your client. And then you got to come home and it's tough because you have to get your way on site. I have kind of the opposite problem, I think, as a project manager myself is um, maybe a bit too compromising and trying to play both sides of the field and not being assertive enough. And I think you have to have that perfect mix, especially between the site and when you come home at night. And it can be tough because you're right. Like a project's your baby and you want to be involved in it and you want to see it do well. And that's your job, right?
Right. And I mean, that's the same thing. And for me in a project, like when I say assertive, it's based on facts. Like my biggest thing, my motto is like the facts always outweigh the facts can't lie. Like there's no, messing around the facts or spinning the facts. Facts are facts. So when I'm working on a project and something doesn't make sense, I do pull out all the facts, I lay it on the table, and I deal with it with a degree of reasonability because there has to be some understanding that we're all trying to build something here. We all have an end goal. Why make it more complicated than it needs to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And the facts don't lie for sure. Now, just in hearing all the roles that you've had, it seems like it's been a busy career to say the least. You're flying to and from Calgary, you're dealing with time changes, you've got it seems like a lot of responsibility and some very large scale projects. And you didn't really know that you wanted to be a project manager in the beginning. You've kind of fallen into this role. So was it what you thought it would be when you became a coordinator? And why do you love it so much? Or do you love it?
I do love it. I can't imagine. It's hilarious because I oftentimes when I start getting to the point where I'm burning out because I'm so busy, I always say, "Oh, I want to take a step back and do something a little simpler." I always take something simple and I actually I take more on. I can't help it. So I think it's again, it's a natural type of person I am, and I do like to problem solve. Like my biggest thing is I like problem solving, and I think you being a PM makes you utilize that muscle so much more than most jobs. Like I constantly have to think outside the box. I have to read code language or lease language and think, okay, like how can I spin this so that it suits either me or my client? So I think, is it what I expected? Yes and no. I mean, I as a coordinator, I did get exposed to seeing how project managers operated. It's funny that you should ask that because when I started off as a project coordinator eons ago, one thing that a PM that I was working with said to me that I'll never forget and probably made me who I am is he's like, I don't know why you want to be a project manager. You're just too nice. I don't think you could do it. And that fueled a fire in me because I don't think you have to be a certain way or super aggressive. I think that's very old school mentality, actually. I think coming from a
Yeah.
place of collaboration and information, and when you need to be assertive, but like don't do it in a way that it gets personal. I think that's the new age way of being a project manager, and I think it's the way that this industry is going.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a difference between being assertive and presenting the facts and building the project the way it's supposed to be built, and then just being an asshole because that's who you are.
Exactly, exactly. As you know, you got to leave that ego at home because
Yeah.
it doesn't help anybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What do you think some of the biggest challenges that you've faced in redevelopment construction? Because redevelopment seems like something, it's a whole different beast compared to, something that's maybe a new hole in the ground or residential construction. What do you think the unique challenges of redevelopment are?
I would say the unique challenges of redevelopment is you're really at the mercy of city. Whenever a developer comes in and they're planning a redevelopment, no matter how great it is and no matter how much it's going to impact the economy in a good way, the process of the city just gets more and more complicated. There's a lot more rules. There's a lot more, actually, there's a lot less of like flexibility. They really make you provide the information in a manner that is it feels like you're just repeating yourself and resubmitting the same information in different for a different perspective just so you can suit the particular person that's reviewing it.
Right.
I would say from a developer side that is probably one of the most frustrating processes, but the things that are unique and they're not unique is it's always it's budget. These developments are, before they get off the ground, they are based off a budget that presents a certain yield, a return on investment, for lack of a better phrase.
Hmm.
And, just trying to make sure that, these projects start 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 years in advance. And over those 10 years, numbers go up, numbers go down. There's ebbs and flows in construction. And by the time you're actually building it in the ground, those budget numbers sometimes don't make sense. And so, because of the duration of projects when it comes to redevelopments, it is really unique when it comes from a budgeting perspective because people expect you to hold numbers for 10 plus years. And it's just not a realistic way to operate. And try to explain that to people that are not in construction, because a lot of these developers are their background isn't necessarily construction. It could be a financial background, it could be an operational background. They just don't understand why you've given them a number, and then over the years that number has become much higher because of inflation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you present that, or how do you deal with with that? Do you have any tips?
When you initially present the budget, I think the tip from there is, putting in caveats that there's a rate of inflation. We all use a percentage. I can't remember if it's 1.25, but there is a rate of inflation calculation that you can use. And then you kind of expand that throughout the years. But it's also bringing in construction partners early on, which I think a lot of developers are doing. Is they're bringing in construction management teams from the onset of the project, and they're retaining those construction project managers and checking the budget along the way, just so that at the end, no one is just blindsided. So my suggestion to a lot of people on that is, bring in if you don't have a strong construction team or background in house, bring in a construction management firm that can help you with the budgeting end of things and keeping you on trend of how the market in terms of costs are going and projecting.
Got it. Good advice. Good advice. Now, that's redevelopment, obviously, and there's probably similarities and differences between that and what you're doing now. But what does your day look like at Cactus now? Now we've seen what you look like at Shape, and it's you're working from home and you're putting out fires and you're a PM and you're in Calgary and all these great things. What is Cactus like for you on a day to day?
Well, my role at Cactus is a little bit different. I'm not so much running projects personally. I have a team that runs projects. So my day to day is a lot of meetings. It's coming in and going from the different, whether it's learning how to better IT and AV build outs in our new stores, or learning how to best utilize Procore, because that's a construction management program that we use, and then just going through development meetings with our leasing team and our architect and consultant team. So for me, a lot of my day-to-day tasks are implementing new processes or bettering existing processes to make our build outs and our projects more efficient. It's building relationships with the existing vendors that we have, and it's supporting our facilities team because we have operating restaurants. We're constantly going in and bettering them. But shutting down for longer than a week is just not a thing that Cactus does. So we have to make sure that our build outs are done in an efficient and clear manner, and the information on the plans are, vetted prior to starting construction. So a lot of my day to day task is looking over process and procedures and finding betterments.
Do you enjoy that process more than being directly managing the project like you were at Shape?
I mean, I still do a bit of the projects. I've actually specifically requested that. So the best way for me to learn coming into Cactus Club, not having a background in restaurant construction, is to start at the grassroots. I don't come in there with any kind of an ego, assuming that because I've done it for years as a project manager, that I know what their nuances are. So if I actually do, I have a project that I'm managing out of Calgary, a new build, and that's so I can learn the process myself. And because the only way I can fix or better a process or understand it is to actually go through it myself from the perspective of a project manager.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, I do still get the project management exposure. I do like the overseeing portion because I get to utilize skills and mentor our project managers, which is something that I've worked hard to hone in as a skill.
That's very cool. I like that. Now, one of the things you mentioned in there is that your day is full of meetings. There's a lot of meetings. And in construction, especially in roles like yourselves, on my project in particular, I'm on a P3. There's a ton of stakeholders, and it seems like your day 3:30 comes around and you finish your last meeting, and now it's time to go to work.
Yeah,
And
that's absolutely true.
yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of meetings, not just on this job, but in a lot of jobs in the past, is there's a lack of organization, a lack of preparedness in the meeting, and it seems to trail off. And instead of holding sidebars or really trying to direct the meetings, I see sometimes that either the client or the GC has too much power and the meeting becomes off topic
Mhm.
really quick and it goes over time. So I was wondering if you have any advice for holding an effective meeting and trying to make sure that it's as efficient as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely have been in many of those meetings where it could have either been an email or it goes off on a tangent and you walk away not knowing what the meeting was about. So for sure, when I do my meetings or if I have control over my meetings, what I suggest and what I do is I put together an agenda. I go into the meeting with basically like knowing what I want at the end of this meeting, having a result based like agenda, but also keeping people on track. So if I set up the meeting, I manage the meeting. I, not abruptly interrupt people, but I definitely redirect them back to the topic at hand. And my biggest thing is I don't let people walk away from a meeting saying, oh, we'll look into it, or we'll get back to you, or this is going to be, let's take this offside, or whatnot. Put deadlines to it. And I also say, I don't know why we can't resolve this in the meeting we're in. Can we just get some facts out there? I understand there's going to be maybe some research and more checking in required, but let's just have a discussion as opposed to taking it offline. Because what I find with taking things offline is you're not involved and it just goes offline for a couple of weeks and gets forgotten. Effective meeting minutes is really big too. I find that a lot of meetings, you come in, there's like general chatting happening, and then everyone walks away. They get busy, like something else comes up, another fire happens. Then 2 weeks go by, if it's a bi-weekly meeting, and people don't have any idea what their deliverables were from the previous meeting. So my suggestion is, go into the meeting with very clear, concise agenda. Make sure to keep everyone on track. And you're the person, if you're the one that set up the meeting, you are the chairman or chairwoman. So you're responsible to keep the meeting on track. Uh, Walk away with clear deliverables and timelines. And then check in a week. If it's a bi weekly meeting, check in a week before and just say, hey guys, just want to make sure that we have a meeting next week and these are your deliverables.
Now, one of the things I host all the meetings on site right now, so this is kind of a selfish question, but I'm sure people can relate. It typically the meeting comes in the form of a Word document that's minutes. and
Mhm.
that's got the attendance, and then it's got obviously all the main talking points below. One of the things I find is, I think you may have just touched on it, but let's say, for example, you get to item like 10.1, and it's to do with some electrical system, and it's going to require, somebody to give you an answer by so and so or whatever date it is. So you put that person's initials and you date it, and then those minutes go out right after the meeting's done, and then you come to the next meeting, and it's not like it's one person in particular. It's just repetitively these things are just reappearing on the agenda, and they should have been closed off, but there isn't action. Do you think that sending those meeting minutes back out a week prior to that biweekly, or just reminding the individual person, helps? Like, how do you keep people on track? Because even for myself, I forget, because you're in so doing so many things in a day,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, so I recommend what helps me, and I definitely find that it's beneficial, is a week in advance of the next meeting, or if it's a weekly meeting, just a few days before the meeting, reissuing out the minutes and just saying, hey everybody, just want to make sure that you are aware of the outstanding items. These are and I put it in the body of the email sometimes. Like, there's something specific that I know is required for the next meeting, and you sometimes it's the same person that they always miss their deadlines. I don't call them out per se, but I just kind of say, hey, just a friendly reminder that this is required. And then what I find is, if you explain the why, like, I need this information because the trickle down effect is this, and this. Sometimes people think that you're just asking for it for the sake of asking for it, and they make a decision, oh, they can wait. But then if you tell
Right.
them, no, actually, this is why I need it because it impacts this, it puts a little bit more of a accountability onto them. So, I mean, those are some of the tactics, is definitely remind them. I know a lot of people think, well, I've already issued the minutes. It's not my job to babysit. But unfortunately, as a project manager, I would say you manage people more than you actually manage a project.
That's true. Do you think that that's probably the biggest skill that you need to have as a project manager, is the soft side of things, the soft skills, the people skills?
Yeah, I think it's the majority of what I do as a project manager is manage people and their different personalities. And I would say my psychology background actually has helped me be able to do that more efficiently. End of the day, people are going to do what they want. So if you're the project where you're constantly calling them out and they don't want to come to your meetings because they know they're going to be called out, or it's going to be an aggressive meeting, the likelihood of that person actually succeeding on your project is very slim, because they have this feeling that, I don't want to go there. I don't particularly like this project manager, and no, he's not a priority, or he or she's not a priority to me. This other project, which is way more fun and they have great meetings and they're very efficient, that's going to be where I expend my energy. So it definitely is like, people are human. They're going to react a certain way. And if they don't like you because you're, not a team player, or you're not working on the softer side of things, you get to be sometimes bottom of the pile.
Right. That makes sense for sure. One of the things that just came to mind that I wanted to ask you was, if you keep a daily journal of any kind, and that could be a personal daily journal, or a site daily journal, or a daily log through Procore, or whatever it may be. Do you do that type of thing?
Well, I have a notebook and I write everything that I work on. I'm still old school that way. Like, I use Procore when I want to formalize something, and we do site observations, and we use the tools on Procore because it actually is. It sounds like a commercial for Procore, but it is a great management tool. But I'm old school. I still have a notebook that I write everything in. If I have a phone call, I write the date, the time, and what was discussed. I use that as a reminder of my conversations, but also as a tracking method for the day to day issues that I'm dealing with.
Do you find that you have to reference back to that information quite often, whether it's because there's a claim, or there's he said, she said type of thing going on? Do you find that that comes in handy for that aspect of things?
I definitely think that's why I do it. For me, I'm very legal or litigation based. That's my training in terms of, when I studied university. Part of psychology is, there's always going to be a situation where there is a he said, she said scenario, and how to, and people tend to remember things based on their own biases as opposed to facts. That's natural. That's the way humans think. So what I typically do is I write these notes down and then I follow up with an email. If it's a phone conversation, I use the notes from what I wrote down to reiterate, hey, based on our conversation, this is my takeaways. This is what you're bringing back to the table. And this is what I need to buy. It's that extra step that I know sometimes when we're busy, we're like, oh, why should we have to follow up? Why should we be the ones taking the notes? But it really does make things easier. And then you have a reference point. There's no, oh, I didn't know, or oh, I missed that in the phone conversation, or it was a miscommunication, because you're putting it out there on black and white.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, in regards to that, when we talk about following up, one of the things that comes to mind is we have all these inputs, right? So you have text messages, phone calls, personal notes you've taken, you've got meetings, and then you've got emails.
Mhm.
And I've heard some very funny ways that people remind themselves how to do specific things. I've heard people that will actually call themselves and leave a voicemail
Oh
and
yeah,
say,
I've heard that.
do this, or send themselves emails. How do you remember to do all the things that happen in your day on a daily basis?
I mean, I have a really good memory. Like I do. And that's, one thing that my husband talks about is I don't forget things. So I naturally have a good memory, but I definitely take down notes, and I don't send myself text messages. I don't do the voicemail thing. I do know people do it and it works for them. What I do is I end up at night before I go to bed. One thing to help me sleep is I plan out my day. So I pull up my calendar and figure out what meetings I have that day. And then I go back on my notes for that particular meeting. Say the meeting was a bi-weekly one, I'll go back 2 weeks from the previous meeting and prepare myself that way.
Okay, so you're well organized for the next day, and then that kind of gets it out of your mind so you can sleep and you know that everything's ready for tomorrow. You're not waking up scrambling, wondering where you got to be, what you got to do, type of thing.
Exactly. Because I find that the worst thing you can do is show up to a meeting ill prepared. It just impacts everybody, and people just don't want to get work done. And then you lose your reputation and respect. So my biggest thing is I try to be prepared for a meeting, and even 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting, I'll come in and reread the notes and prepare my questions.
Awesome. That's great. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about in terms of tools, and I'm sure you've had to deal with this a lot when it comes to tenants, and probably even now when you're dealing with sub trades, is there's a lot of negotiation that happens in construction.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are hard conversations to have with people, whether it's negotiation on price or negotiating, different things that are in their tender clauses that you want to maybe blackline or remove. Do you have any tips for initiating a negotiation with somebody or trying to arrive at a common ground when it comes to things like that?
What I recommend in terms of negotiation is that do your research before you go into any type of negotiation. Like I research the people. Like I will, if I'm going into a tenant and landlord negotiation tactic, I'll actually pull them up on LinkedIn so I know what I'm dealing with. Like, do they have a lot of experience? What's their previous experience? So I definitely research my opponents, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But I also, when I go into a negotiation tactic, it's a give and take scenario. Like I know I'm not going to walk away with everything that I want, specifically when it's related to a lease or a tenant, because they're going to have their needs and wants, and it's a fine dance to have an effective project, be reasonable, make sure that we're not expending a shit ton of money unnecessarily, and staying on budget. So I pick and choose my
Yeah.
battles. I pick and choose what hills are worth dying on. And then, yeah, the thing I said before is leave your ego at home. End of the day, it's about facts. So if I'm negotiating a lease, and when I was on the now that I'm on the tenant side, if I want something and they're like, nope, nope, this is what you're getting. You're getting 3,000 CFM exhaust opening, and that's all we're providing you. I go back to them from the standpoint of, in order for our business to be successful, I need this size of a CFM. You want us in this particular facility. You want us to succeed because our success is what really pays the rent. So does it make sense is this the hill for you guys to die on? Because I could go in and do a bigger opening and all this other work, but then now we're doing it in a sequence where your envelope is done and I have to go back and open up your envelope. So I try to come from a situation of reasonability and what makes the most sense in the end.
Yeah, that right there, it strikes common ground because you need the opening. They don't want to revisit the envelope, and that makes sense. And they do
Yeah.
want you. And I think that's a lot of the times is it's hard to see. What I've been gathering from talking to numerous people now is it's just a lack of being able to see the side of the other person, because
Yes.
when we go into a negotiation or we go into a meeting or we're dealing with clients and contractors, it's always you think that you should get everything, they think they should get everything, and they're not willing to see the other side of the story. And this is probably common in life as well. And I guess that's probably where sometimes we get the us versus them mentality when it comes to clients and contractors. Do you think that that is kind of settled the same way?
Yeah, and I actually was going to mention that before is I don't like the us versus them mentality. And one of the first things that I do in a startup meeting is I bring in our consultant team, I bring in the contractor, and I'm very clear that this is a team. You're not going to get brownie points from me by calling out one another. When there's issues, for sure, bring them up. But if you're not able to resolve the issue amongst yourselves and you're just using me as basically tattletaling, it doesn't fly. I say that from the get go, and again, I do try to bring in our contractors early on because, as I find with a lot of consultants, there's a lack of on site experience. And
Hmm.
so the combination of their skill set in terms of problem solving and using a contractor who's been on site and has experience troubleshooting, that is actually the best drawing set you're going to get. So I mean, it's a team mentality in my world, and I definitely think that there is that us versus them that is starting to change as we start bringing in construction management firms earlier into the project.
Have you ever been involved in a partnering session?
How so?
So, partnering session, I mean, it happens on all sorts of projects, but typically P3s. And what they'll do is they'll get the client, they'll have the consultants, and they'll have the contractors all in a room together. It usually lasts a full day, and they'll make 10 or 12 buckets and put those buckets up around the room. So it could be like design, it could be health and safety, it could be schedule. And then what they do is they have teams, they put everybody in a team, a diverse team of consultant, contractor, and owner. And everybody gets together and they write their biggest concerns that they feel under each bucket. They go and toss those up under each bucket, and then you get a sticker based on your discipline. So it's
Mhm.
colored, and you go stick it on that bucket and say, I think this is going to be the biggest impact to the job. And then you do breakout teams, and they take the top three buckets. And as a team of people, you come together and you deconstruct how you're going to approach that difficult subject on the job, and then it
Mhm.
really gets you to know all the people behind the email addresses, because that's another problem too, is you're
Yeah.
firing these emails off to people on a daily basis and you never actually get to meet them, and they're just people like us, and their job is to either get a project built for them or build it for somebody else, and at the end of the day it's the same thing we're trying to do.
Exactly. I've never done that specific way that you're the partnering. One thing that we have done is we bring in the general contractor and specific sub trades and the consultants and ourselves, the owner, into a meeting. And we actually, what we do is a page turn on a particular project from the beginning to the end. And we talk about all the nuances and complications, but not to the point where you're referring to where it gets into breakout teams and comes back together. I think that's a great tool, and I might have to steal that from you. But no, I definitely, I think that getting to know the people as humans first, as opposed to email addresses, is very important. It's so easy to I find it so easy with people to fire off these, assertive, aggressive emails and finger point, but they wouldn't say that to your face. That's very rare because there's that level of like human factor that is missed when it comes to emails and text messages. So I always, try to say I like emails because I like to keep documentation, but I always say when the emails get past one or two and you're not resolving the issue, pick up the phone and call because sometimes it just requires you guys to hear each other as opposed to reading each other's emails. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that we do need to get to know our teams better when we go on to these types of projects. That's the one way to be successful.
Hmm. And just to give you the last piece of the partnering session, everybody takes a group picture, and then all of the outcomes that came from each bucket that were discussed, they go onto a charter, and that charter gets distributed to each team member so they can see it and say, "Don't forget that you were with these people in this room on this day, and you agreed on these things, and that's what we're going to deliver on throughout the course of this project as a team together, egos aside."
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's great, and it kind of puts people like, it makes them more accountable because they were part of that meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the last industry specific questions that I wanted to ask you before we get into a couple personal rapid fire questions here at the end is, it's kind of the elephant in the room these days, and that is the diversity in the workplace, especially women in construction. And we've been talking about it, it's out there in the open, and there's a lot of really good things happening in the industry. But what's your take on diversity in the workplace, and what does it mean to you to have a diverse workplace? And do you have any stories that you can share?
I mean, diversity in workplace is huge topic on the mind and current trend in the news. I was mentioning to you, I just finished a book about women in leadership, and it talks about how successful companies are becoming more and more diversified. And my reasoning and understanding from that, based on experience, is you only know what you know. So if you surround yourself with a bunch of, middle-aged men that are, of a certain demographic, you're all going to have the same experiences, and you're only going to base, your project or your lessons learned based on the experiences that you've experienced. When you diversify your team, you get the benefit of having other people's experiences or how they interpreted the situation, because a lot of times how you interpret a situation based on your historical experience is very different than how someone else experienced it. And we all go through different challenges. Men and women have different challenges depending on the circumstances. So being able to have a diversified team allows you to take care of all of those blind spots and, in a sense, make your company or your team that much more better. In terms of actual specific experiences, I mean, I would say my team, that Cactus, and my team at Shape were always diversified. There was a good mix of women and men. And, I definitely suggest, I'm not saying give a woman a role because they're a woman. I say hire the best person for the task. I'm a very big proponent of that. One thing that I was reading that I think is a great example of a situation that we should use more in our hiring process is take away the gender and look at the resume without the name, based on strictly their experience and what they bring to the table. And then once you've done that, then get to know the person as who they are, because I think sometimes we come in with our own biases, and the hiring, definitely, depending on who is doing the hiring, they base it on their own biases. And if you don't know the gender and you don't know the name of the person, but you're just strictly basing your decision on their experience and their knowledge and their education, I think you're going to get a more diversified team just by nature of that.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Do you think that being a woman in construction, do you think it was difficult for you do you think that you could have gone further if you were a man? Do you have any feelings like that? I'm just curious.
I definitely think that there's been glass ceiling up situations that have happened because I'm of a woman. I know in previous, not so much in my own experience, but in terms of my friends who are, on the same level as I am, they've reached a point in their life where if they want to have children and they want to take time off, they're automatically, whether they verbalize it or not, there is that sense that, she's going to be off for a year and her priorities are going to change. So we don't need to invest in her necessarily as much, because if we invest in her and she goes away for 18 months and then comes back and then she wants to go part time, you know, what are we going to do in that situation? Have we wasted our investment? So I do think that there have been situations where, depending on the company and what their goals are, there are situations where I have experienced that through myself or my friends, where they're just basically, they reach a certain point and there is no further upward movement. I mean, I think in my last job, even at Shape, I think that there was a definite ceiling set that, I wasn't able to necessarily climb my way up any further. And I do venture to say that I think in part it could have been because of being a woman and the age demographic that I was in.
That's a shame. I wish it wasn't like that. And I'm very happy that there's people like Build a Dream and Noor's company out there, and women like yourself that are, you know, you're somebody that I'm sure a lot of women idolize and look up to in the industry. And I think you're doing a lot of great things, and you're very smart and driven. And I hope that we can continue to get a bunch of people behind us to continue to diversify and make the industry as great as it can be. And there's so much opportunity that we don't even have, there's no place for limiting the other 50% of the population at all anymore. There's just too much opportunity, too much going on. And there's some very smart people out there. And like you said, it's the right person for the job. Could be a man, could be a woman. It doesn't matter. Like you said, I think that's great. Maybe strip the name off the resume, have somebody that's screening the resumes do that, and just look based on the facts, the experience, the education, where's this person from, and then take it from there. And, we'll keep fighting that good fight and putting the right people in the right positions.
Fantastic. Yep. I'm on board with that.
Cool. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I like to ask this to project managers because it's kind of a unique aspect of project management, is it can bleed into your daily life. Have you used project management for any major projects at home?
I mean, I have. I would say, my husband would say that's me on a daily basis. But as you know, with Matt, he does a lot of renovations. So he purchases condos and then he flips them. So in terms of the paperwork end of things, that's where I'm really good at the organizational and the paperwork and dealing with the stratas. So I do utilize my skill set there. Anytime we run into any kind of an issue, which is if there's a legal matter or a formality involved, I definitely bring out my project management skills, and I would say that's more often than not is I do bring that project management aspect home.
Very cool. And what's the name of that book that you mentioned you read about women in leadership? Be good to link to that for anybody that's listening that may want to take a read.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it is. I think it's an older book, but I still found it useful. It's actually called "Female Leadership."
Motivate and
Oops.
inspire.
Female leadership, navigate the minefield of modern life to become, sorry, I'm just reading this, become a female leader. And it's written by Sophie Lawrence.
Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes, definitely on the website if anybody wants to pick that up. Sounds like it's a good book. Miriam, who do you think inspires you to be your best self every day?
I would say there's two specific people. It would be my husband because he has such a belief in who I am as a person that even when I sometimes question myself or my skill set, he is 100% supporting me and just reminds me that that I am a boss and that I've worked really hard to get where I've gotten and to not let minor setbacks impact my day to day work life. And then I would also say my parents because they sacrificed a lot to, I wasn't born here. They brought me here at a young age to better myself and my opportunities, and they sacrificed a lot on their end to make that happen. So those would be the two groups of people that I would say have helped me be the best that I can be.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite quote or philosophy that you like to repeat to yourself or that you may live by or that you picked up in a book or something in your life?
My favorite quote is "We're not saving lives." I say that often because we get into our own heads that every issue is like life and death, and we need answers by a certain amount of time. And we forget what we're actually doing. And the thing with construction is it's very forgiving. You might have to spend a little bit more money, but you can undo it. You can fix it. It's not the end of the world if you miss a date. It's not preferred, but we're not saving lives. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not going into surgery at this moment saving someone's life. So my favorite quote to say when things get like that or complicated or remind myself that I'm not saving lives.
I'm gonna have to steal that one. I like that a lot because you're right. There's so much urgency all the time. Like, oh my god, the world's gonna end. You have to have this done for me tomorrow. That's it. Do you have a favorite story from project management that comes to mind?
My favorite. There's so many. My favorite story goes back to what I mentioned to you about how I became a project manager and what lit that fire underneath me is I remember like that day. I remember where we were. I remember the exact conversation of this PM saying, "Oh, why do you want to be a PM? You're too nice to be a PM." And at that moment, it just like it something switched. I was on 50-50 on becoming a project manager. That made the decision for me. So I would say that is my favorite moment because that is a defining moment in my life. And I mean, from that, there's so many lessons learned. Like my first project, I was working for the Australian consulate. I was building their office here in Vancouver, and
Wow.
my first inspection failed because they needed mag locks, which is I know working in Vancouver, mag locks are a big life safety concern.
Yeah.
And the inspector failed me and I had to walk away because it was my first project. I had just failed my inspection and it was one of those ones where the deadline was very tight. I walked away, I composed myself. I actually went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror and said, "You know what, we can fix this." And I came back out and we worked something out with the inspector where we got partial occupancy. So my moments in life have always been when there's adversity or complications or challenges, take a breath, because again, we're not saving lives, and there is more likely than not, there's always a solution.
That's great. Well, you know what, Miriam, this has been awesome. You're an inspiration to me, and I'm sure many others that are going to listen to this in the future. And you've left a lot of really good tools that people can take away and hopefully implement. I'm sure I'll take away some of your meeting advice in my next meeting coming this week, a couple of my bi-weeklies. So thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have anything else that you'd just like to leave behind for people to think about before we get to wrapping up?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest recommendation for anybody as a PM or any situation where you're dealing with difficult conversations or meetings is always put yourself in that other person's shoes. I try to come from a place, because I have had so many hats myself, is I try to put myself in that person's shoes. Like, why are they being so difficult? What is their motivation behind it? Am I being unreasonable? Because when you come from that place, you actually are able to problem solve a lot better than only seeing your point of view. So I definitely say, find out, because most of the time the person is not being malicious. They're just trying to get their job done, and they probably have their own requirements and deadlines and whatnot. So come from a place of a bit of compassion and understanding, and always try to understand the why behind things before you try changing the how. Come from a place of facts. I can't stress this enough. Know your facts, have an understanding. Don't go into things blind.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Where can people reach out if they want to get in touch with you? If they want to see what you're up to, is LinkedIn maybe the best option?
I would say LinkedIn. I do check my LinkedIn. I'm on there. Every other day, just checking to see what's on trend. LinkedIn's probably the best. I do have Instagram, but it's more of a personal Instagram. So I would say LinkedIn's the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. And for anybody listening, this episode is available on toolspodcast.com. And we will link to a lot of the great stuff that Maryam has left behind for us. And again, Maryam, thank you so much for coming on Tools of the Trade.
Of course, it's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. For show notes, blog posts, resources, and access to our newsletter, check out toolspodcast.com.